All right, welcome back, students. It is Mr. Mace again, and we are going to cover Unit 3, Lesson 11. And more than likely, guys, I will be breaking this up into two separate videos again. This is one of the more confusing lessons that we cover in Unit 3. And I don't want to give you too many back and forths, but we are learning to divide by fractions, learning to divide so that the quotient ends up a fraction, and it ends up creating a lot of confusion, because in most cases when we learn to divide whole numbers, we learn that numbers get smaller. Okay, when we divide, let's say, just a really basic example here, I'm going to go to the top of the page, 4 divided by 2, we are taking that total of 4 and we're breaking it into two groups, or breaking it into groups of 2, and coming up with an answer that was smaller than our total. As we progress through today's lesson, guys, and especially this first video, we're going to talk about why that doesn't always happen when dividing by fractions. Okay, when we're dividing either by fractions. Now, just like dividing whole numbers, the order is extremely important. What we are dividing and putting in those places, we need to make sure we understand. And we also need to kind of wrap our minds around the fact that oftentimes we see division problems that look like this right here. All right? And they look like a number, division symbol, and another number. Okay? And those numbers and those ideas have terms. They have vocabulary that goes with them, and I think that's going to be really, really important for us to stress that moving forward throughout this lesson. Is what is the dividend, what is the divisor, and what is the quotient. There's three parts to a division problem. Just like there are parts to a multiplication problem, factors and products, we have that same setup with dividing. We have a divisor, a dividend, and a quotient. All right. We also, however, see problems like I've got circled here written in kind of a long division format, or a format that looks like this. Now, I know in my 20 plus years of teaching, guys, that putting the right number underneath the division symbol or in front of the division symbol sometimes gives kids problems recognizing what number goes where. Okay, so as I look at what I see right here, I take this front number, which we actually call the dividend, and I put that underneath the long division symbol. Okay, and I take the divisor, which is the back number here, and I place that in front. That's called the divisor. And then the answer to the division problem is the quotient. Okay, and that will go up here if we are doing this in long division terms. So just try to wrap our minds around what this looks like. Now, if I look at that long division problem, you might look at me and say, well, Mr. Mace, that's not possible. We can't divide 2 by 3. I can't take 2 and break it into groups of 3. It doesn't work that way. Well, that's where the fractional piece comes in. Okay, and that's how we start to get answers and quotients that have fractions as the answer. Okay, now, like I mentioned a couple seconds ago, the order is everything here. Okay, order means everything. Now, we've got some visual images here, which I think will help us a little bit, and I'm going to focus the first part of this first video for sure on just pages 147 and 148 in your math expressions book. So if you're following along with that, hopefully you can write in your answers as we go through this, all right? So question number 1 says 3 friends divide 2 sandwiches equally. What part of a sandwich does each friend receive? So as we look at this, all right, we can see the 2 sandwiches they've given us right here. Well, obviously, each friend is not getting a full sandwich. We don't have 3 sandwiches and 3 friends. We've got less sandwiches to give away than we have friends to split it with. Okay, so friend 1 is going to receive the front ends of this sandwich. Friend 2 is going to receive the middle third, and friend 3 is going to receive the last third. But you can see that he's getting a third of each of these sandwiches. Okay, that line goes between all of them. So if we look at this, we can see that we're not getting a full sandwich, but we are getting parts of both of them. All right? So as we look at this, they want to compare it to and show us how it is equal to multiplying with fractions, because we just just covered multiplying with fractions in the last lesson, and hopefully you realized how much easier, in all honesty, multiplying by fractions is as opposed to adding and subtracting of fractions. We don't need to have a common denominator. We don't need to do anything aside from multiplying straight across, multiplying the numerators, multiplying the denominators. The difficulty comes in dividing is that we use a word called a reciprocal. Or we multiply by the opposite. So that's where it's going to get and tend to be a little confusing for us. Okay, so here is the first image where we are dividing two whole numbers and ending up with a fraction as the quotient. What that actually means, it is equal to taking two sandwiches and multiplying it by 1/3. Now, if we look at the relationship between the back numbers, the 2 stayed the same, but we are multiplying by the opposite of 3. The opposite of 3, or the reciprocal of 3, is 1/3, or 1/3. Because if I look at 3 written out as a fraction, if I'm putting them both into fractional terms, that'd be 3/1. And I just flip that back fraction. Now, I can only use the reciprocal for the back fraction, for the divisor. Okay, I cannot change the 2. I can't flip that around or my answer will not be correct. I know, confusing, right? Kind of a crazy scenario here. But what this also means then, again, showing us how this just kind of progresses, 2 times 1/3 means the same thing as adding 1/3 twice. Well, we got a common denominator, so this basically comes across to be 2/3. And if we look here, we can see that each friend is going to get 2 pieces with sandwiches broken up into 3 pieces. So 2 out of the 3 pieces of those sandwiches are those friends going to get. Okay? So each friend is going to receive 2/3 of a sandwich. Again, I think there's going to be some questions after these videos, but we're going to do our best to try and explain this going forward. So I'm guaranteeing there's probably going to be 2 videos here. So now we are still dividing whole number by whole number. But notice that the order has changed. In this first problem, we started with the smaller number and divided by the larger number. Well, here, we are doing a more traditional problem. We've got a larger number being divided by a smaller number. But we're still going to end up with a fraction as part of the answer, part of the quotient. In this case, it's going to be the remainder. It's what's left over. Okay, so again, if I rewrite this problem as a long division style problem, it's going to be 5 divided by 3. Okay, the 5 is the dividend, 3 is the divisor. And now, I know that 3 can go into 5, but it can't go in evenly. All right, so they're going to show you how it means the same as multiplying. I'm going to show you how I can divide this problem and end up with my fractional remainder here. All right, so 3 goes into 5 one time. All right, 1 times 3 is 3. I'm going to subtract and end up with a 2. The 2 then becomes my remainder. The 2 becomes my new numerator, and the divisor ends up as my denominator. Excuse me. Okay, and you'll see that we'll end up with the same answer going through how the book explains this problem. They're saying 5 divided by 3 means the same thing as 5 times the opposite, 1/3, which is the same thing as 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3, or 5/3. But if I convert 5/3 into a mixed number, which we almost always do, I end up with 1 2/3, which is what I ended up with by just dividing originally. And I know in my class, and I know this video is going out to more than just my students, I know in my class, we've been talking about the fact that that fraction bar also doubles as a division symbol. It means the exact same thing. So that's why when I write 5/3, that simply means 5 divided by 3. And I can set that problem up and solve it that way. So each friend in this case is going to receive 1 2/3 sandwiches, or 5/3 if we want to look at it in that format. All right. There's so many different examples that we need to bring you through here. That's the crazy part. So now we are not talking about a fraction as a quotient. We probably still will have a fraction as a quotient, but now we're seeing fractions as our dividend, or a fraction in the problem itself. Okay? So in this one, we are saying 1/3 divided by 2. meaning I'm taking every one of those 1/3 portions and I'm breaking it into 2 pieces. Okay, another way to say this, again, remember that 2 also stands for, in fractional terms, 2/1, mean the same thing, but it's also going to mean the same thing when I multiply by the opposite. Multiply that by that reciprocal. Notice the 1/3 stayed the same, but the 2 is the thing that flipped. It went from a 2 whole numbers to 1/2 to get our answer. So if I multiply straight across here, this is going to end up with an answer of 1/6. This is one where I think the picture really helps us. If we look, and I'm going to change colors here, if I've got my sandwich broken up into thirds, which I've been working with all the way through, I'm now going to change colors and show you how dividing each of those thirds into 2 pieces gets me the answer that I'm looking for here. Okay? So if I'm breaking that up into each third into 2 pieces, now his sister is going to receive 1/6 of that sandwich. So Sasha has 1/3 of the sandwich. Right here is what she has as the 1/3 piece. He divides it into 2 equal parts and gives 1 part to his sister. What part of the sandwich does his sister receive? She's going to receive 1 of the 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 pieces that have been created of that sandwich. So again, we're taking a fraction, we're dividing it by a whole number, and it's actually becoming a smaller fraction. Okay? 1/6 is smaller than 1/3. Again, order is everything on these numbers. So now we're taking it again. This is a very similar problem to one we had last. We got the fraction in front and the whole number behind. So we've got 1/3 divided into 5 pieces. So each 1/3 of that sandwich is now being broken up into 5 pieces. And again, you can see that illustrated here on the image, right? But what this actually means is this 5 is a 5/1. It's going to mean the same thing as multiplying by 2 fractions or multiplying by the reciprocal. The 1/3 stays the same and the back number is the one that has to change. Always the back number. And this is going to become 1/15. 1 times 1 is 1. 3 times 5 is 15. And so the positive is we're not really ever dividing, right? We're always going to end up multiplying to find our answer. It's just, are we multiplying by the whole number or are we multiplying by a fraction? In these first couple examples, we are multiplying by a fraction. All right, last couple examples here. Now we are going to be dividing by the fraction, okay? And this is where it gets kind of weird, at least in my mind, and it's always kind of thrown me for a loop, okay? They are saying here, how many 1/3 pieces of sandwich are there in 2 sandwiches? So we've got 2, and we're going to divide those 2 pieces up into thirds, or those 2 sandwiches up into thirds. And then how many are we going to have total? Okay, so this problem here, to divide by that fraction, means we are still going to multiply by the reciprocal. What is the opposite of 1/3? It is 3/1. Okay, so I can change 2/1 or leave it the same, obviously, but just turn it into its fractional form, and I can multiply straight across. Now, hopefully we recognize sooner rather than later that I don't need the ones on the bottom. It's not going to change. That 3 times 2 is 6, but it stands for 6/1 because we're multiplying by the reciprocal. And here is where our 6 pieces come in. If I take those 2 sandwiches and I break them into 1/3 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But you can see now, guys, how the order is extremely important. If I have a whole number in front and I'm dividing by a fraction, my number is actually going to get larger. I'm going to figure out that I have more pieces than I started with before. I only had 2 sandwiches before. Now I've got 6 pieces of sandwich after that. All right? So in this case, there are 6 1/3 pieces of sandwiches together. All right, and then the last one here for this first video, and we'll go to the second one. Same concept here as the last question. Now we've got 5 sandwiches, and we are going to break them into 1/3 pieces all the way through. What that actually means is I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, by its opposite, which means I'm going to multiply by 3/1. If I make my 5 also a fraction so I can multiply it easily, 15/1, or just 15 1/3 pieces of sandwiches. Now, this is just the first video. I will hopefully go in more in depth in the next video, guys, and it'll make more sense. I know it is confusing. Ask questions if you have them.